Hey y'all, Zelda here. I am coming to you today with a bit of a story time on a topic that I have been reflecting on a lot, which is learning how to pray. And I have been reflecting on this in part because I have felt myself engaging with prayer in a different way lately. And it's been kind of a long journey for me to figure out what this means to me. I also felt like it was something that I didn't find like when I wanted to learn how to pray, so to speak. And I'll tell you kind of about the story of how this went. I don't feel like I saw people who were talking about things from an experience that really resonated with me. And so I just felt like I wanted to share. So, in order to give you a background, I grew up really non-religious, I guess. I grew up with a father who was what I refer to as a dogmatic atheist. And although my grandmothers, like my paternal and maternal grandmothers, were both like Christian or Catholic, and I would say more in like a spiritual way, but definitely like believed in like the church. And there was some sense of like in the family lineage, there was like some importance to these traditions. My father really didn't believe in institutional religion and was very strict about it. Like I was not allowed to. Essentially told my grandmothers that if they brought religion up around me, they would no longer be able to have a relationship with me. It was just something that he was really strict about. He was also very rigid. He's mellowed out a little bit with age, but was just a very rigid, this was like a very like integrity oriented, like values principled thing for him. And so I grew up actually kind of like, I think longing a little bit for spiritual connectedness. I had like imaginary kind of spirit guide friends. I like left offerings for fairies and things, but my dad was very like, this is what's real and this is what's not real, and was very like scientific, like I would say like scientific materialism, very like if you can't prove it, it's not real type of thing, which is I like to believe that I am a very scientific person, but I take a very different approach to science. And my mom was very different with my little sister. So my parents got divorced and I mostly was with my mom. And then my stepdad is Jewish, and she did kind of like introduce some of these elements with my little sister. And I do think I like watched that and like wished that I had some element of, especially like the ritual. Ritual always really appealed to me throughout my life. Like when I was younger, ritual and community. And it was just something that we grew up, I moved around a lot. I didn't really feel a part of things. I really had like this feeling of being left out and longing for a place of where I belonged, like a sense of belonging, and also a sense of like connection to something bigger, like a sense of meaning or purpose. Like I really wanted to know like why you do something. And I think religion was kind of appealing to me in that way. I do think it was kind of like a blessing for me in terms of like thinking about like choosing this lifetime to live. I do think there was something that allowed me to make decisions for myself that I wouldn't have had being raised in the way that I was. And it is unique to a lot of the people that I encounter. So it's just something that I think is important as a background of like, I had like kind of like a clean slate in terms of prayer. Like I didn't know what it was really. I didn't engage with it. I didn't know it. I don't know any religious language really besides what I've studied and picked up as an adult. And I don't consider myself to be a religious person despite being a very devoted and very spiritual person. So that's like background, like growing up. And then in college, I also didn't have a lot of interest, I will say. Like besides like I wanted to sing, I had an interest in rituals. I didn't like have interest in like praying. I didn't believe in like a monotheistic God. I didn't have a lot of interest. And I actually didn't even really have a good experience of asking for things. I had the experience growing up of having to get a lot of my needs met myself. And like not having like experiences of neglect. And so I don't feel like I really like asked for help when I needed it either, let alone from like a spiritual source. I didn't even ask for it from like actual people in my life because I didn't believe I was going to receive it. So, I mean, I also think that's a big part of the context of this too, of like learning this skill that like I didn't have and I didn't learn and actually applies in my life in lots of different ways. In college, I studied writing and poetics and somatic psychology. And one of the classes that I took early on in my undergraduate degree was a class and a training on authentic movement. And in authentic movement, it is this practice that is so near and dear to my heart from the tradition of dance movement therapy, where you walk this circle, then you, as a mover, you go into this space that is essentially what I would consider to be like a trance space, where you are being moved by your body, by your embodied spirit. And it was very significant to me. And one of my very dear friends at the time, we would meet and do authentic movement together regularly and would provide witnessing. And in this practice, there is a mover and a witness, and sometimes several movers and a witness, or several movers and several witnesses. And with this friend, we would meet on a weekly regular basis and would move and provide witnessing for each other. And one of the practices we started to develop was kind of like asking this question and then entering this trance space, not really knowing, like I didn't have the language for it that I do now after having like developed my spiritual journey and language, but that's really what we were doing. And in this experience, so as a mover in this experience, I had this vision where I was asking for the next step in my journey, both career-wise, but also spiritually. I was feeling really lost. I was feeling really challenged. I was having a lot of challenge in my life, and I was especially with like my health. And so I was asking this question, and I had this vision. I was in front of this tree, and I like put my hand on the tree and realized that there was a door in the tree. And I opened the door and I walked down the stairs, and down in the depths, like with all of like the roots of the tree, there was like this kind of like cave. And in this cave, I had this feeling like I'm going to meet this like animal guide. And in this cave, there was a mole, and the mole was there kind of like moving around and like turned to me and wasn't quite looking at me like moles, it was kind of like looking off, but speaking to me. Like I felt the presence on me, and I asked, like, what am I supposed to know? Like, what do I do now? And the mole said, you need to learn how to pray. And that's all the mole said to me. I asked more questions. They didn't respond. They kind of went back to what they were doing. I walked out. I had like the rest of my experience and wrapped up. And it was very interesting because I do think there was some element, now I'm remembering, like there was some element that I like wanted to encounter like an animal guide, and a mole was not the power animal that I had in mind. Like it was just like, it was very surprising, right? And in the quality that I find like often genuine trances can be, where it feels very like not what I would expect. And so I was almost like surprised. It felt like this like wisdom. And so I really took this like learn how to pray. And I love to study. I'm kind of like a nerd in this way. And I wanted to learn how to pray. And a lot of the prayers that I found were religious, I guess, in nature, right? Like I have this book of like Psalms and that I got, and I couldn't connect or resonate. And I realized that something that felt really, really silly to me was this aspect of like just asking or saying things in a language that didn't make any sense to me. Because I wasn't raised and I didn't really study or resonate with like the language of the Bible, biblical language doesn't really resonate to me. As someone who's like really into writing and poetics, it probably is like total slander to say this, but it feels very much like Shakespeare or something, where like it's really beautiful, it can be great, but I don't have a lot of connection to it, so it doesn't like move me because I don't really understand it. And I didn't really feel like it was the right direction to go in. Like because I don't feel religious, I feel like using that language didn't make sense to me. So one of the ways that I entered learning how to pray was thinking about what is like non-denominational spoken word. And for me, that really led me into poetry. I also really was moved by the book Untie the Strong Woman by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I feel like Clarissa Pinkola Estes has been really foundational in my journey of like spirituality. I studied a lot with her work and have been really moved by her teachings. And I think this really helped me connect to like the mother archetype. I think like archetypes in general and like entering through the language of psychology made a lot of sense to me. Psyche and spirit are very intermeshed in my experience. They are not fully separate, nor do I think they were really intended to be separate. And I think that is kind of like a reaction to scientific materialism and this like need of psychology as a discipline to like prove itself and be like scientific is like almost distancing itself from the spiritual nature, which is in fact a lot of what psyche is, like the study of the spirit and the study of spiritual disciplines. And I think that like powerful therapists and like, you know, healing artists are dabbling in both the spirit and psychology, and like often are walking that line between the two. Anyway, so that's kind of a digression, but while I loved some of those prayers, I still really gravitated towards things like devotional nature poets. And I really just practiced like memorizing something and saying it as like a ritual, like using my voice in practice with my spirits. The Untie the Strong Woman, When Women Were Wolves, Women Who Run with the Wolves, and When Women Were Birds, like memoirs that were like devotional in nature. That's Terry Tempest Williams, another like nature writer. All of these were really foundational to me, like learning about how writing and spirit interact and how spoken word and spirit interact. I think another thing that was really pivotal in learning how to pray for myself was I studied with Caitlin Grania, who is a spiritist and a spiritista, and teaches a lot, goes by Mother of Mystics online. And they really talk about, I think it's a quote from someone else, but about like performing your prayers. So doing it like in a very embodied, performance oriented way, which I really connected to, of like how to kind of like not feel so self-conscious about it, to like perform my prayers for my spirits, like to feel like my energy was going into an act of devotion. Having things memorized helped with like not knowing how to like kind of improvise. But as I became more comfortable, I found that it almost started feeling more conversational. And I do think that prayer definitely got a lot easier for me when I started developing relationships with my specific spirits on my spiritual court, because it did feel more like having a conversation. There just felt like a lot more ease in that. Before that, it almost felt like talking to the energy of spirit, and that's okay. I feel like that was an important part of my journey as well. I always kind of felt I felt like I was like learning the language for something that I already believed in, and I didn't know how to describe it or like discern it. And one of those is like figuring out how to relate to like animism, which I felt like was very real and alive in me, but also how to relate to being like a spiritist in a way, which is feeling like I related to many spirits and many alive aspects of the unseen that felt very real to me, and that I was learning how to relate to in a way that felt good for me. And prayer is one of the ways that I did that. But I do think that there is a difference between having a conversation with your spirit and praying, and that is a line that honestly I still struggle with sometimes. Part of why I wanted to make this, and I'm looking down at some notes so that I don't get like too lost, is that I really felt like a really difficult part of praying for me was learning how to ask for help, humility in this, or like humbleness in this way, to ask and feel like deserving of support, and also the vulnerability of hoping that something would happen. I do think somewhere like along the way in the trauma of my life, like the complex trauma of my childhood and life, I did shut down at a certain point to being willing to hope, because being disappointed felt so devastating. And this is something I talk about with a lot of clients, that I think is just something that happens that almost is like forming a callus or something. Trying to become resilient to disappointment or failure is like reducing that willingness to hope at times. And that is a very unhelpful side effect, or consequence rather, that often needs to be like healed to be able to feel deserving of good things and to receive more. In therapy talk, I think of this as like upper limits work. So like our window of tolerance, there's like that upper limits. I think I talk about this in a video way back where I was talking about the Empress and upper limits. And there just is this like willingness to receive, but also the willingness to ask, even if you don't receive it, right? The willingness to hope for something better, for something different, to ask for help and be willing to acknowledge that like I feel in this moment like I can't or I don't want to do this on my own. And that has been such a practice of vulnerability for me in praying, is asking my good spirits for help. I realized even recently that I received some guidance to pray about something, and that I was doing a lot of like devotional acts and like getting guidance, but I wasn't actually like asking for my good spirits, for the good spirits of my spiritual court that I work with in a devoted way, to actually like help me with the thing. And there felt like this like push from them to be like, ask us to help you. Like, we want to help you. We also want you to be willing to ask. Like, part of this is like, I do think that spirits don't always need to be asked, in my opinion. But I also think that, one, there's an element of consent, like them intervening, like kind of like if you're like watching a kid do something, that it can be valuable to like wait until they ask for help rather than like swooping in and doing something for them. I do feel like there's some sense of like, sometimes you don't want to like take things over when you're like in a learning process, and asking can almost be like a turning over of like, I'm ready for intervention in some ways. And that doesn't always mean like a miracle is going to happen or the problem is going to go away. Sometimes like the help can be guidance or understanding of what to do next, or honestly, even just the process of surrendering and being willing to be like, I need help. I want help. I'm open to receiving help, whatever form that comes in, or in these specific ways, right? It's okay to want to be consenting around the kind of help that we receive as well. I just think that this form of prayer really brought me in touch, and even just like struggling with this aspect of prayer really brought me in touch with the reality that I also struggled with asking for help from other people, believing that if I asked, that help would be provided, being willing to do things like actually ask like my healthcare providers or my therapist for help, rather than just like trying to struggle through until they like saw that I was flailing and intervened anyway, right? So that's something that I have found really beautiful. I think that the practices that have been the most helpful are noticing when I am struggling with something and making an intentional space where I just practice asking for help around that, or talk about it, or share the struggles that I'm having, and express what I feel like would be helpful. And honestly, sometimes I even can intervene on my own behalf after hearing the prayer of like, if I am praying for rest or relief, I can also intervene on my own behalf and provide myself some rest and relief. And I hear that. So yeah, I'm really curious about whether anyone else has this experience, or has experiences of how they made prayer their own, or learned how to pray in their own ways. I am always still learning. So this is a practice that like I'm sharing about my experience with it, but I am certainly not an expert on prayer or learning how to pray. I just am finding that it is a teaching that, especially as things are so difficult, and I'm going through some difficult, challenging uncertainty in my own life, as well as like the reality of the collective of uncertainty and stress of things that are like beyond and outside of our immediate control. Not that like we do not have things that we can do or things that we can control or contribute to on a personal level, but the willingness to pray for something greater also feels like keeping the hope alive that something greater is possible, that a world that is more beautiful and just and compassionate and courageous and creative and, equitable is on its way to us, is coming. And I just think that that's really necessary right now. So I also would love to know if you have any poems or prayers that you connect to. I'm always like collecting. I love like memorizing or collecting or writing things down. I love reading and writing. So that seems also really beautiful. I also love writing my own prayers and then memorizing them. I think that can be a really powerful practice. I think that's all for now. Maybe I'll have more things to share on this eventually, but this is the story that I wanted to share. Thank you so much if you spent this time with me today. Many blessings and bye for now.